Hi, in this video I'll walk you through the process of turning one of my digital pieces into a physical artwork, specifically how I create generative embroidery. So this is the original piece, entirely made with JavaScript code. From here on out, I let my voice clone do the talking. It sounds a bit boring, but it's still quite cool and convenient.
Embedded within the original generative code is a system that allows me to export a vector file in SVG format. This file is composed of several layers, each with its own color and stylistic properties. I load the SVG into my plotting software called PlotterZ. This is the tool I've used to create all of my drawings since I first began working in generative art. It supports multiple machines and languages, capable of generating G code for a robot or EBB code for an AxiDraw. Since August 2024, I've been developing a new module specifically for embroidery. For this, I relied on a library called Stitch.js, created by Matt Jacobson. It took months of learning, trial, and error to develop the algorithms needed to produce the various embroidery stitch styles that would allow me to generate DST files compatible with my machine. Here, I select the stitch type best suited to each layer of the SVG and fine-tune the parameters to achieve an embroidered result that stays as true as possible to the digital original. This is a subjective step. My familiarity with the piece, my artistic judgment, and my hands-on experience are essential. That's why I never tried to automate this part. The result here is a file with 85,000 stitches, which represents almost a full day of machine work. After a final round of previewing, I can export the .dst file, which contains the definition of the exact stitches that the machine will have to execute. Now it's time to prepare the embroidery frame. I'm working with thick cotton canvas. Since it will be under strong tension, I apply a layer of non-woven paper to the back to prevent the fabric from being compressed. This is a self-adhesive stabilizer that can be torn off after the embroidery is complete. This embroidery frame is the largest size my machine can handle. At maximum, it allows embroideries up to 40 by 50 centimeters. The current project is a square, 31 centimeters on each side, which means there's quite a bit of fabric loss around the edges. The frame is mounted directly onto the machine's moving arm using 3 screws that aren't exactly easy to reach. The DST file is loaded into the machine via a USB key. I select the correct hoop format, then I have to manually assign the thread color sequence. That's because DST files don't contain any color information at all, and the machine is already preloaded with all my favorite threads. The setup is quick, but you don't want to make a mistake at this point. The last thing to set up is the bobbin underneath. I usually match it to the same color as the top thread. It helps hide any minor tension issues. So with every new thread color, I also change the bobbin. It's finally time to press the start button. The machine selects the needle that matches the first thread in the list. And just like that, we're off on an adventure that will last several hours. First, I have it stitch the outline of the embroidery area. This has several benefits. It helps secure the stabilizer in place. It makes it easier to tear it off cleanly along the edges. And most importantly, when it's time to stretch the piece onto a board, I'll be able to align it precisely using that stitched perimeter. For the next job, I've grouped 2 layers that share the same color. The first is the fabric's distinctive pattern, made of vertical and horizontal lines that are present in every embroidery. The second is a motif that covers the surface of the tree's branches. It's made of small squares stitched with dense diagonal lines. For this one, I always use a thread color that closely matches the fabric. I've grouped these 2 motifs into the same job, so the algorithm could compute some path optimizations. Therefore, this job is a mix of both patterns. You might think that once it's started, all you have to do is wait for the result, but that's not quite true. Sometimes the bobbin needs to be replaced midway through. Sometimes the threads fray or snap, and you have to step in. Here the machine was complaining about the bobbin that had run out of thread. Clearly the most common of incidents. It's better to avoid this by pausing the machine before the bobbin is exhausted. Otherwise you have to figure out where it failed and go back a few dozens of stitches. After 2 or 3 hours of relentless stitching, the machine finally comes to a stop, and it's time to enjoy a brief moment of silence. Honestly, I'd love to stop here. I find these textures elegant just as they are. But we have to keep going, to stay true to the digital original. Next, we'll continue with the background attribute from Aux Arbres. In this case, it's a pollen background, made up of hundreds of tiny arc shapes. For this motif, I chose a satin stitch, very tight and therefore slow to embroider. Since the arcs are spaced apart, the machine has to tie a knot for every single one, at the start and at the end of each line. That adds a lot of time to the embroidery process. The pollen background is now complete. We move on to the branch fill patterns. These are curves with a thick line weight, created using back and forth rows of what's called a tatami stitch. Each row is slightly offset from the previous one, like bricks in a wall, to create a strong and even structure. And now we reach the final layer, the one that completes each of the embroideries in tree 138, the line. This continuous line serves to bind all the previous layers together. It connects graphic elements from the background, the branches, and the leaves. It brings both a strong contrast in color and in composition, and a sense of balance between figuration and abstraction. In this case, it's stitched in 3 uninterrupted passes. La broderie est terminée, which means the embroidery is finished. Not quite though. Let's admire the job a little and then move on to all the steps of the preparation for mounting. The moment of removing the frame and extracting the fabric is probably the most emotional part of the process. From that point on, there's no going back. I carefully tear away the excess stabilizer on the back, following the stitched outline. Then I draw a contour around the embroidered area, keeping a consistent margin, using the width of my framing ruler as a standard. I trim the fabric using pinking shears, which help prevent the edges from fraying. Let's take one last look at the back of the embroidery. It tells a whole story of its own. Next, I measure and cut a piece of cardboard, the same type used in frame backings. This is what I'll use to stretch the embroidery onto. All the techniques I apply from here on were taught to me by my framer in a crash course that lasted about 10 minutes. It's a long and meticulous process, usually handled by professional framers, but with around 100 pieces to prepare, it would have been far too expensive. And beyond that, understanding the artwork was essential to stretching it properly. So I learned, awkwardly at first, then with growing confidence, how to stretch the fabric evenly over the board. I hammered in thousands of tiny nails, often using just my fingers, until my index was full of punctures and my hands cramped from pulling so much. To ensure that the embroidered lines stay perfectly straight, especially the long horizontal and vertical ones, we have to place the nails very close together. In practice, they're spaced about 5 millimeters apart, or 1/4 of an inch. It takes a crazy long time. Finally, after a few hours of work, the canvas is neatly stretched. All that's left is to fold and secure the fabric cleanly on the back of the board. I start with strips of double-sided framers tape. It's extremely strong. At first, it drove me crazy trying to peel off the plastic backing, but I eventually came up with a foolproof technique. I scratch it with my curved scissors. A quick pass with the iron helps flatten the corners nicely. Then I prepare strips of framer's craft tape to seal the fabric to the back. I number the piece on the reverse side. And that's it. Oh, I almost forgot. One mandatory stop at the photo shoot to create a high-quality archive image. And place it in an acid-free plastic sleeve for protection. This one will be part of the next batch headed to the framer. A few days later, the canvas is framed. Here it is on a prototype of the tree, alongside a few other embroideries. This single frame is, in truth, only a small fragment of a much greater whole. Tree 138 is on view at Bitforms Gallery in New York from June to August 2025. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this glimpse into the process. Until next time.